Hi boys and girls. So today we're going to focus on realistic fiction for one more day. We're going to talk about how their plot, their characters, and their setting all have to be things that could exist or happen in real life. Our big focus today is figuring out what in the story is actually believable and what might not feel believable but could actually happen or is actually happening in the world around us. All right? So we're going to look at two different books, one that we've already read before, and then we're going to look at another one we've read before that I'm going to reread to you guys so that you can do the assignment for today. Okay? All right, so let's get started. First off, thank you all my friends that are at 3M. We are using our Post-its like crazy. I know we have a lot of parents out there, so shout out to 3M. We are going to look at King for the Day. King for the Day was a book we read about the kids who wanted to be the kite king, not the real king. So when I looked at this book and I started thinking about what seems believable, it stuck out to me that Malik had to deal with a bully. And this is something, unfortunately, that does happen in real life. This specific problem during this specific story wasn't a real problem, a real story. Therefore, that's what brings it into the fiction world. But it could happen. It's really relatable and believable. Now, when I started looking at the book and thinking really hard, what in here does not seem believable? I was like, oh, well, flying kites, that seems real. My kids love to fly kites. But then there was something that I was like, what? I would never let my kid do this. This can't be real. So I started thinking and I came up with, they were kite fighting from the top of buildings. How many of your parents would actually let you go on top of your building or on top of your roof of your house and fly a kite and try to pull other kids' kites down? I'd be really surprised if your parents would allow that, but who knows? So I had a hard time with this. At first I was like, well, maybe the book's not actually realistic fiction. Maybe it's fantasy fiction. But doing research, there are countries out there that do this. There are places that actually have these competitions. So it could really happen even though it doesn't feel believable. There are some parts of realistic fiction books that might not feel real or feel believable, but they really could happen. Now, I'm not going to the extent of like magical powers and mermaids. We'll eventually talk about those more when we get into our next genre of focus, which is fantasy books. But when you're reading a book and it's part of the realistic fiction genre, really look at it and say, can this all happen in real life? Yeah, but what parts feel maybe a little bit pulled out or a little stretched? Which ones do you feel like you're stretching the truth a little bit on? That's going to be your big question. So today we're going to read a book that we read towards the beginning of the year when we did our author study on Alan Say. We're going to read Grandfather's Journey again. During this book, I want you to focus on a couple of things. I want you to figure out what in the story is really believable. What could you see happening on a daily basis? And then I want you to look for at least one thing in here that you feel like is a little unbelievable. I don't know about that. And that's going to be your assignment for today. You're going to, when I'm done with this, go and email your teacher or go on Google Classroom, depending on whatever way your teacher wants you to do it. And you're going to tell them, based on the story, what is one believable thing from the story and what is something that is not believable, but actually is something that could happen. Okay, let's get started. Grandfather's Journey by Alan Say. My grandfather was a young man when he left his home in Japan and went to see the world. He wore European clothes for the first time and began his journey on a steamship. The Pacific Ocean astonished him. I wonder why he chose to wear European clothes. Maybe we'll find out. For 3 weeks, he did not see land. When land finally appeared, it was the New World. He explored North America by train and riverboat and often walked for days on end. Deserts with rocks like enormous sculptures amazed him. The endless farm fields reminded him of the ocean he had crossed. Huge cities of factories and tall buildings bewildered him and yet excited him. He marveled at the towering mountains and rivers as clear as the sky. He met many people along the way. He shook hands with black men and white men, with yellow men and red men. The more he traveled, the more he longed to see new places and never thought of returning home. It's interesting that he never thought of returning home by seeing all these new places, but rather they gave him a sense of adventure. I often think about that, like when I'm on vacation. I want to explore everything around me, and as much as I miss my house, I'm just loving all the new information and new sights I'm gaining. Of all the places he visited, he liked California the best. He loved the strong sunlight there, the Sierra Mountains, and the lonely seacoast. After a time, he returned to his village in Japan to marry his childhood sweetheart. Then he brought his bride to his new country. They made their home by the San Francisco Bay and had a baby girl. As his daughter grew, my grandfather began to think about his own childhood. He thought about his friends, his old friends. I'm thinking because it's saying grandfather, and he had a child, I'm wondering if this is the author's mother. We'll have to wait and see. He remembered the mountains and the rivers of his home. He surrounded himself with songbirds, but he could not forget. Finally, when his daughter was nearly grown, he could wait no more. He took his family and returned to his homeland. Once again, he saw the mountains and the rivers of his childhood. They were just as he had remembered them. Once again, he exchanged stories and laughed with his old friends. But the village was not a place for a daughter from San Francisco, so my grandfather bought a house in a large city nearby. There was a young woman who fell in love and married her sometime later husband. And later on, I was born, so that was his mother. When I was a small boy, my favorite weekend was a visit to my grandfather's house. He told me stories about California. He raised Silver Eyes, but could not forget the mountains and rivers in California, so he planned a trip. But a war began. Bombs fell from the sky and scattered our lives like leaves in a storm. When the war ended, there was nothing left of the city and the house where my grandparents had lived. So they returned to the village where they had been children. But my grandfather never kept another songbird. The last time I saw him, my grandfather said that he longed to see California one more time. He never did. And when I was nearly grown, I left my home and went to see California for myself. After a time, I came to love the land that my grandfather had loved, and I stayed on and on until I had a daughter of my own. But I also missed the mountains and rivers of my childhood. I missed my old friends. So I return now and then when I cannot still the longing in my heart. The funny thing, the moment I am in one country, I am homesick for another. I think I know my grandfather now. I miss him very much. All right, so boys and girls, I want you to re-evaluate that text, evaluating the plot. Remember, evaluating means to dig deeper than just what you always see at first glance. So I highly suggest you listen to the story one more time and really think about what seems believable and what seems unbelievable. I'm really excited to get your guys' responses, especially because I'm interested to see how many believable things we find that are different and how many unbelievable things we find that are different. I find this one a lot easier to do than this box, but we'll have to see what you think. So I can't wait to hear from you guys. Have a great day and get outside if it's nice out there. Bye, guys.